Where are we with simple but very dangerous hacks like this? Where are we in the next 18 to 36 months? Are there emerging technologies that could make password stuffing even more dangerous, or is something else going to overtake this?
So I think we're in a great point right now of getting better, not yet having gotten better. There's two different technologies that are really helpful here. So one is the concept of password vaults. You know, for years, we in the security industry have actually given people really bad advice. We said, don't ever write your passwords down. And the reality is that that's what most makes passwords safe. When you don't have to memorize them, then the password is safer because you're unlikely to reuse it. So the advent of password vault technologies, where the passwords are all encrypted in a data store and you can get access to them easily and conveniently, enables people who want to use them to have unique passwords. That minimizes this attack.
So we're talking about defense.
It's a defensive maneuver. The other defense that's fascinating is two-factor authentication. You know, actually moving to places where you're using a push-based authentication app on your phone, or maybe it's over SMS. You know, and there's serious weaknesses with using SMS as a second factor, but it's still often better than the credential stuffing threats you have. So those are sort of defensive for the individual. At the high level, you do see more anti-credential stuffing technologies starting to come into play. People who can, like Akamai, we detect bots, and so we can monitor the bot networks that are doing the actual work. Because what we said, it's this person, they're not a hacker in a hoodie. I can't imagine trying to work, with that hood pulled over your face. But what they're doing is they're taking and they're running a network of bots, machines that have been compromised from various ways, and they take those bots and they say, try these passwords for me. Well, if you can profile those bots, you can minimize their ability to test passwords. Maybe you tell the bots that every password is wrong. Maybe you tell them that 10% of the passwords are right, but not the right 10%. And now you're creating sort of this attack against that gig economy.
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned bots. How does attacks like this scale? And I assume it's with bots. I also assume that artificial intelligence, machine learning plays a role here in helping these attacks become massive. Help us understand that.
So I think the bot networks are fascinating. And here's another place where the gig economy has sort of kicked in. We used to think of adversaries as sort of these sort of omni-powerful entities that owned their whole supply chain, right? They did everything from start to finish. What's happening now is they subcontract. So there are people who are bot herders, and what a bot herder does is they build a bot network. And they do that by taking some vulnerability that's usually well known, and they're just going to see which machines are vulnerable to it. And we see this certainly in the IoT, the Internet of Things space, where, video cameras that have default login credentials. So you just try those. Every one that you can log into, you install a small program on it that dials back to your command and control system. And now you can issue it orders. And then what they'll do is they'll take that and they rent the botnet out. And so you come along and say, hey, I want to rent a botnet. I want 100,000 nodes for an hour. I'm like, great, give me 50 bucks. And for the next hour, you have control of that botnet. You can issue it commands. So you hand it your database, and you say, against this website, try this set of usernames and passwords. All that work gets farmed out, so there's a lot of automation involved in doing that. And then it'll do it. It gives you back the answers. You walk away. And the bot herd now says, okay, I got my 50 bucks. How many machines did I lose? Because I was detected while it was doing it, and people went and cleaned up those machines, so I have to rebuild my network. So there's sort of a full-time, I just think a bot herder is the right name for them, because much like a shepherd is responsible for the health of their sheep, this person is responsible for the health of their bots. So that's sort of how these attacks are really getting started and growing. I think from an AI and machine learning perspective, I think we're still in the early stages of that, thankfully, and partly because there's no need for those advanced technologies. It's really been around, can they do scalable systems administration to be able to manage that large of a bot herd?
If I'm a CXO, how do I defend against this?
Right. So if you're the CXO, you really have to look at what are you defending. And there's your principals, right? The people who work in your company. I have to protect my CEO, I have to protect every one of my employees. But then I also have to protect the users of my services. And I'm often going to do that in two different ways, but with a similar approach, which is I'm going to look at how do those people do authentication. Right? When they connect to one of my systems, how do I know it's them? And if I'm relying on something they know, like a password, I should recognize that that knowledge gets shared and gets lost. And so I want to move to systems that don't rely on that. For instance, at Akamai, for our corporate users, the vast majority of our authentications don't even use a password. There's a certificate installed on every machine. The machine cryptographically can assert that it's my machine, and that triggers a push-based authentication step to my phone. So I get two factors, right? I have to have both of those present, but neither one of them is a password that an adversary can steal. Each is tied to a specific piece of hardware that if an attacker does steal it, I'm not saying they're not stealable, but I know that they have been stolen. Whereas when someone steals my password, I have no idea it's been breached. So that's one place. And when you think about your corporation, it's almost an easier problem. While we often have legacy applications that might be hard to upgrade and interact with, we still control all the applications, and more importantly, we control the user experience. And so we can identify ways to make that experience better for the user and more secure. The challenge on the consumer side, when I have end users and I'm trying to protect them as the chief security officer for a product space, is I don't control their environments. I don't control their user experience. Maybe those users are using phones that are 15 years old, don't have modern browsers on them, and I can't really say, hey, you have to change that. I think at the 15-year-old phone point, we may draw that line, but you'll often draw the line much further out than you will for your own employees.